Okay, welcome to the official Jets podcast presented by Amazon Web Services. Ethan Greenberg here with Olivia Landis and Eric Allen, all in our respective homes. And this is a weird time considering, one, the legal tampering period just started. Two, we're all cooped up in our houses. And three, it feels like everything happened, but nothing happened at the same time. So I just want to start things off by asking how the both of you are doing in your respective homes.
Well, I have been cooped up now. What is this, guys? This is day 5 or so for us. And I have my dog, but I do live alone. So I'm going a little crazy. We've been taking a lot of walks outside. But it's a little tough, talking to your dog all day.
Well, a man and woman's best friend, a dog. Listen, I got to say that this is a surreal experience, I think, for all of us. The coronavirus has taken the world by storm. We got more than, 4,000 cases in the United States. More than 70 people have already died. States across the country have banned large gatherings. I'm hearing people say that you shouldn't be around more than 10 people in the same room. And we all have a hand in protecting each other. So because this is a community, this is really when it's important for you to take care of everybody else. And what's so surreal, guys, is that, we're supposed to be taking care of other people by actually staying away from them. And the other thing is we're such a social being. We're such a social animal. So I think it's difficult. I just went to the store, and in New Jersey, there is a curfew now mandated. Went to the store about 7:00 tonight, and I got a piece of salmon, and the gentleman who was serving me said, "We're going to be all right, aren't we?" And I said, "I certainly hope so." So nothing's normal right now, but I think that the best thing we can do is talk to people and communicate and share with them our thoughts, not only the Jets and the National Football League, but how our lives are being impacted, and also letting them know that we're very concerned about each and everybody.
Well, yeah, I think that's a great point. I also think that I said this to Olivia earlier today. When I went to the grocery store, it felt like I was in the Hunger Games. Like, it's just everybody's going crazy. And the thought that, football is nonstop. And I don't even know what it would be like for us if this were to happen during the NFL season. So I'm thankful that it's during the offseason. And it's one of those, my roommate said this to me. I think it kind of hit home. It's like we're living a chapter in a history textbook right now. And I think it's just going to be crazy to think back even a year from now, to think that on March 16th, on St. Patrick's Day, we were cooped up in our apartments because it's for the best of society. And, I'm a people person. I want to be at work. I want to be outside, and to be in my apartment all day is just driving me a little crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that.
Yeah.
But the NFL. We're here.
What was that? Well, the NFL hasn't stopped, and I think that's really where we're going to kick things off here, because even though the coronavirus or COVID-19, however you want to call it, is greatly affecting everybody's lives on the day-to-day basis, and of course the NBA suspended indefinitely, March Madness shut down, no March Madness. This is a different kind of March Madness.
March Madness is probably my favorite sports viewing of the year when we get away from the National Football League. And you feel bad for so many people, including not just the college athletes, but how about the college kids who have to maybe finish their senior years from home on a computer and not being around other people. And so many schools across the country closed, obviously, daycare centers. But you're right. And what happened over the weekend was there was that period of uncertainty where you didn't know what was going to happen. First, was the CBA going to be passed? And if it was passed, were we going to go on with NFL free agency as scheduled? And I'll tell you what, guys, I've never experienced a number of days like we've had since the weekend, because it just has just come in waves every passing day. And I didn't know if we were going to have free agency. We're going to get to this point where we're going to start the negotiating period, but it actually happened. But it all started, Greens and Liv, I guess Saturday night into Sunday morning when the CBA just narrowly passed.
Yeah. Look, Liv, I just wanted to ask you, because away from football, one, the thing that stuck out to me about how this whole thing has hit me is in a number of ways. I would imagine for you, it was when the NBA got suspended indefinitely. Like, was that really when you were like, oh my God, like this is going downhill, and it's going downhill quickly?
Yeah, honestly, for me, I have, and you've probably seen this at work, but I've low-key been keeping an eye on this whole situation for probably a solid month and a half now. And, it's scary. It's given me a lot of anxiety personally, especially, kind of living by myself and not really having any family out here. But I think last week when everybody, it was heard around the world that Rudy Gobert had contracted the coronavirus, and, following that, the NBA decided to pretty much shut down the entire season. I think that's when the entire world was like, oh no, this is actually very, very serious. But I mean, honestly, this has been on my radar for quite a while now. So I'm kind of like that, though. I'm a little bit of a worrier. So.
And a germaphobe. So this is definitely like your worst nightmare coming to life. But
hold on, I am as well. So don't take shots at Liv there.
No.
We're in the same boat.
You Lysol down your desk like every day at the end, and your phone. I see it happen. I know.
100.
Yeah, me and EA have an understanding, germaphobe to germaphobe.
Yeah.
So
my hands are so raw just from washing them like 1,000 times a day that it hurts to put hand lotion on my hands.
But it's a good thing. You'd rather have that than germs.
That's fair. But in terms of the NFL, to get back on track, because this is the official Jets podcast, there's a lot of things have happened in terms of events. Obviously, the things that stand out most notably, or most recently, should I say, is that organized team activities, OTAs, there's not a start date anymore. And the NFL draft now is it's still April 23rd to 25th, but they canceled all like public draft events. And we'll see what that means in terms of fans showing up for the draft. I assume that's probably a no-go, considering what EA was saying. Gathering of 10 people is a bad idea, and the draft is definitely a little more than 10 people. But also in terms of pre-draft, all pre-draft visits for college kids on their top 30 visits to the different NFL facilities, that's nixed in the bud. Then most recently, what did Schefter put out today? Adam Schefter recently, a couple hours ago, put out that teams can't go to players that sign with teams in free agency, which is still abiding by the same timeline that it was scheduled to, can't go to a team's facility to get a physical, and therefore there needs to be an agreement to a certain physician, or a player can just straight up decline a physical exam, which is, I believe, unprecedented in something like this, right, EA?
I have never heard anything like that, but extreme times call for extreme measures. And like you mentioned, the league put out a statement tonight about club personnel, including members of the club medical staff, may not travel to any location to meet with or conduct a medical examination of a free agent player. So, yeah, I mean, back forever, it was, hey, the guy did not or will not be part of your team, your organization, until he physically signs a contract. And the big step in that is, okay, you have a financial agreement in place. That's fine. But you have to pass our physical. And sometimes guys will fail a physical. But right now, the league, the player association, everybody has to take a number of precautions here. So, it never, this never would have happened in the past.
Liv, I just want to get your opinion on, first of all, just everything being canceled or postponed the way it is in terms of the NFL. And the second part of this is, you were scheduled to go to the draft. I don't know what this means for you necessarily, but obviously this is kind of a crappy thing, for lack of a curse word here.
Yeah, I think, like he said, I've only been in the NFL. I'm heading into my 4th season. And obviously in my now almost 4 years, I've never experienced something like this. And I think what really stuck out to me was the fact that they're just straight up not allowing players to come to facilities, and coaches and stuff travel as well. Because when you think about it, last year, obviously when Adam Gase became the new head coach for the Jets, they were able to start 2 weeks earlier in their OTAs. And now when you think about it, the coaches that are new this season aren't going to have that luxury. So you're kind of wondering, how are some of these teams going to play catch up when it comes time to training camp and stuff like that? So that is kind of crazy to me. And as far as the draft goes, I think we're really waiting to hear more details on that. But, just based off of what has been going on around the world and some of the regulations that have been put in place, I highly doubt that we're going to be sending a team to travel there. But, like I said, we'll have to wait and see. But it's a scary time. That's still a month away, though. A lot can change in a month.
I don't even know if I don't even know if Las Vegas is going to be the base operation of the draft. That's one thing that I didn't understand about it, that maybe you guys had more clarity than I did. But when I was reading all the literature on that today, they said that all the fan events and all the big events in Las Vegas have been canceled, but they didn't go as far as, I didn't read it, whereas the draft in Las Vegas had been canceled. But I'm assuming it won't be in Las Vegas anymore.
Oh, see, I interpreted that everything would remain status quo, that it'll be in Las Vegas, and that the media networks, meaning NFL Network and ESPN, will cover it like they usually do.
Okay.
But there just may not be any fans. I don't know. I didn't really, to be honest with you, I didn't read over with a fine-tooth comb, but just because there's so many moving parts, which we're going to get into just in a couple minutes here. But obviously we'll see. And everything happened so quickly with the virus that it feels like anything could happen just so as quickly on the opposite end when things start to, turn for a positive light here in our society. But I want to get back to today, because today is one of the most exciting days in the NFL season. Wednesday is the start of the new league year, and today at 12 noon became the legal tampering period. But before that, at 11:59 and 59 seconds was the deadline to place any kind of franchise tag on any kind of player, whether it's transition tag, non-exclusive franchise tag, or exclusive franchise tag. And the big news here, at least for the Jets, is that the Giants placed their franchise tag, non-exclusive, on defensive lineman Leonard Williams, which means the Jets got the 3rd-round pick in the 2021 draft and the 5th-round pick, which was a conditional pick in the 2021 draft, remains a 5th-round pick and does not become a 4th-round pick.
Well, Liv actually is going to have an article on this that we're going to publish on Wednesday. But what the franchise tag actually did was provide them an extension, meaning they want Leonard Williams in the fold. So the Giants didn't want him to get out there. He would have become an unrestricted free agent. So they're buying themselves some time. But with that being said, Greens, I would just like to clarify it. And it still could become a 4th-round pick in 2021 if Williams signs an extension prior to Wednesday at 4 p.m. My expectation is your expectation, and I think Liv would say the same thing, is I don't think that's happening prior to Wednesday at 4 p.m. So it probably will be indeed a 5th-round pick in 2021. So until that becomes official, we still got about less than 24 hours. But yeah, the franchise tag, basically, I'm close to setting that in stone that it's going to be a 5th round pick, because I don't think the long-term extension is going to happen before Wednesday at 4. But I would say too, give Joe Douglas a lot of credit with that trade, because he gets the 3rd round pick this year, and the Jets have 4 picks in the top 80 overall. And then next year, an additional 5. Calais Campbell, who is one of the top 3-4 defensive ends in all the National Football League, got traded on Sunday from Jacksonville to Baltimore for just a 5th round pick, which was stunning to me.
Liv, what are your thoughts on the deal as EA said, the 5th round pick seems like it's going to be a 5th round pick. And I feel like when you look at the value, just as EA did with Calais Campbell, it feels like Jets got themselves a pretty good haul for Leonard Williams.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the Calais Campbell situation is a really great example. And kind of just reiterating back to what you said about Joe Douglas, EA, obviously the Leonard Williams trade, during that trade deadline, it was the only trade that he had made. And I think he did a great job. He got 2 picks out of it, a 3rd rounder and then a conditional pick, which, like we already mentioned, we think if I had to take an educated guess, I would say that the Giants and Leonard Williams are not going to come to a long-term deal before 4 p.m. on Wednesday. So I think it is going to stay a 5th round pick.
Yeah, and I think the other part of this is that when you look at the Jets' defensive line, clearly one of the strengths of their team, and we can talk about those guys at a later date, but moving forward, they have a young core group of defensive linemen, and Joe Douglas is consistently talked about winning the line of scrimmage. And there's so many angles to this. I mean, you look at the 3rd round pick, and a lot of draft analysts say the middle class of this entire draft class, which is, I would say, probably rounds 2 through 4, like that's where a lot of good players lie. And just to keep things draft centric right here, and this is going to be kind of a winding road to get to my point, but the news of today, and I understand nothing becomes official until Wednesday, but the news of today in the NFL is the fact that DeAndre Hopkins, the star wideout for the Texans, got traded to the Arizona Cardinals. And what's amazing in all of this, at least to me, is that the Texans didn't get a 1st round pick in return for DeAndre Hopkins. And I'm not here to question Bill O'Brien or anything like that, who's acting as the Texans general manager and head coach. But the Cardinals were consistently mocked. When I say mocked, I mean their mock drafts consistently had an O-lineman or receiver, particularly CeeDee Lamb, who played with Kyler Murray at Oklahoma. Now that they have DeAndre Hopkins, which is still amazing to me, they seem that they're most likely going to take an offensive lineman, one of the big 4, and the Jets have also been mocked a ton of offensive linemen throughout this draft process. So, EA, how do you think that this trade could impact the Jets come April 23rd to 25th with or without fans in Las Vegas or wherever the draft is going to be?
Okay, so it's 9:28 Monday night. I believe in a few moments ago, Adam Schefter, ESPN Insider, has reported that former Seahawks tackle George Fant has reached an agreement with the green and white. Yep. So we'll have to look at that as hours and the days continue, and that's how quickly things can change. And again, we're kind of in unknown territory once again. I would say that because typically teams in the past won't announce contracts until a player actually physically signs. And the league year doesn't begin until Wednesday, 4 p.m. So the Jets will have to see organizationally if they put something out there as far as an agreement in principle and hours and days, or maybe wait until Wednesday as far as Fant. But numerous media outlets actually reporting that now. So the Jets, no surprise they're looking to fortify their offensive line. You asked me a question that led me to go in that direction, but I know a lot of people had questions about what was going to happen once this negotiating period had begun. And listen, it started at 12 o'clock. It's only 9 hours later. The league year doesn't officially commence until Wednesday. Again, like a broken record. I'd like to say, too, in terms of Joe Douglas, okay, we knew all along that he was going to take a calculated approach. He was going to set ranges in terms of players and contracts. He was going to stick to them. He is a patient man. And this is a guy who's not about winning free agency, okay? We can talk about teams in the past who've won free agency, and with those big splash moves, and very often those teams in January and February, we're not talking about them again. So the Jets are just getting started here with free agency. So sorry to lead you in that direction, Greens, but I thought that
that's okay.
That news coming across the board, we should throw it out there.
I agree with that, but now that you didn't answer, I'm going to ask Liv what she thinks of the DeAndre Hopkins deal, because I was walking to pick up some lunch, and Liv, I almost dropped my phone in the middle of the streets of Hoboken, which is probably a bad idea on any day, and probably a bad idea considering the coronavirus, especially today. So what was your reaction to DeAndre Hopkins getting traded, and what do you think the ripple effect is here for the Jets?
I think it's one of those trades, we see it every single year, but it's one of those trades that kind of shakes the sports world where you're just like, did that really happen? In a lot of mock drafts, the Cardinals, it had mocked that a lot of the Cardinals were going to either be taking, a wide receiver or some player of that sort. And now it's like they literally have one of the top wide receivers in the league. I don't even know how you can on the Texans end. I don't even know how you can back up that decision that is made. I feel like maybe now the Cardinals aren't going to be taking one of the top wide receivers in the draft. Maybe now that gives the Jets a little bit more flexibility and they're able to have some more players available when it's their turn.
I think Arizona's going to go tackle, Greens, don't you?
At 8 overall?
Yes.
It sure feels like that. And, I was thinking about this today. They re-signed DJ Humphries a couple weeks ago, and he'll probably play left tackle. And Justin Pugh, Syracuse alum, shout out to Justin Pugh, plays the right side for the Cardinals. But, hey, there's not a lot of Syracuse alum in the NFL. I heard that, Liv, a little giggle. I have to shout them out when they exist. And 2 of them are on the Cardinals. And so I would feel like, yes, they take – a tackle, but EA, what about this? I was thinking about this too. Okay. What if Derek Brown, who's the top defensive lineman, falls to them at 8, or even somebody like Jeff Okudah? So then if you think about this, the league is going a passing route, and Joe Douglas said you need playmakers on offense, and then you need corners and pass rushers on defense. And the Cardinals, if Jeff Okudah falls to 8 overall, they could have Larry Fitzgerald and DeAndre Hopkins lining up out wide. And then on the defensive side of the ball, they could have Patrick Peterson and Jeff Okudah. I think that would be a cool little quartet there in the desert.
Okay, no doubt. You've done your study. I would say that bringing in Kingsbury, they drafted Kyler Murray last year, and he impressed. Now you're giving him a big-time receiver. I'd make the argument that for my money, DeAndre Hopkins is as good as any receiver in the National Football League. Now, was I surprised by the trade? Not by the time I read Peter King Monday morning, and he said he might be out there in terms of being available for trade. And indeed, that happened. So what was happening behind the scenes there, you never know with Bill O'Brien and DeAndre Hopkins, obviously. Billy O is calling the shots there in Houston. So I wasn't surprised, but when I think about the way that franchise is going with an offensive-minded young head coach in Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray, and now they get the big-time receiver in D-Hop, I could picture them loading up on that offensive line now and getting one of the top tackles.
Here's my biggest question when it comes to this trade. When you think about it, and this is strictly opinion, do you think that Kingsbury approached O'Brien, or you think it was vice versa?
I was thinking about that earlier because the first trade that came out of this whole deal between the teams was the fact that David Johnson had been traded to the Houston Texans. And I was like, okay, all right, well, David Johnson, the Houston Texans, maybe they want to upgrade at the running back position. And then, all of a sudden, and then Schefter, out of the sky, drops DeAndre Hopkins, gets traded in the deal. I'm curious if the conversation was, hey, Bill O'Brien's Steve Keim's the general manager of the Cardinals, hey, Steve, or hey, Mr. Keim, what do you think about David Johnson? What would it take to get him? And then Keim was well, what would it take to get Hopkins? Or if it was David Johnson or if Hopkins was the center of the deal or the originator of the deal, and then David Johnson became a part of it because the Cardinals also placed a transition tag on Kenyon Drake, who they acquired mid-season last season. So that's a great question because I was thinking the same thing, and I would love to know the answer to that.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about.
And also, Liv and EA, I tweeted out earlier if people had any questions for us. So if anything sparks either of your eyes, just let me know. I'm going to start going through some of these questions. And the other part of this podcast, I'm sorry. Go ahead, EA.
No, I was just going to say, Fant's an interesting guy. He played college basketball at Western Kentucky. You
want to get in on the George Fant talk?
Well, a little bit, yeah.
Okay,
because I think it's so topical.
Of course it is.
A guy who played college basketball, that means he's got good feet greens and live. Another thing is he developed with Seattle for the last few years, 4 years. He's 27 years old. Interesting move here. By Joe Douglas's free agency gets underway for the Jets.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at a couple things. It seems like he started 14 games over the past 2 seasons. So he started 7 in 2019 and 7 in 2018. And my biggest question for Joe Douglas is, where do they envision George Fant playing? Would this be on the right side? Would this be on the left side? Because Kelvin Beachum and Brandon Shell, who are the Jets' opening day starters at tackle, are both free agents. So I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. And I know a lot of fans were clamoring for the Joe Tooneys of the world, who got franchise tagged by the Patriots, and Jack Conklin, who the Browns supposedly signed, or reported the Browns signed, and Graham Glasgow. But I still think that there are a lot of quality moves the Jets can make in free agency, not only in the first wave, but also really the second wave. And you talked about this, EA. Everybody that I've spoken to, that when I've asked, hey, what do you think about Joe Douglas's free agency approach? They've all said, I think it's going to be more of a calculated approach, and he's not going to go for the big fish. And, you said this earlier, teams that win free agency, the success rate is not great there. And that's how you get yourself in a bind. And I think Joe Douglas is really trying to flesh out this roster. And Liv, you've talked to people in the league too. It doesn't seem like Joe Douglas is it doesn't seem like he'll get unfazed. Get phased. He is unfazed. He seems very calm and he has a plan, and if the money gets to be too much and he doesn't feel comfortable spending that, he's going to say, you know what, I appreciate your time. Thanks for coming. Let's move on to the next guy.
Yeah. I would say that. Yeah, I think that kind of jumping off of your point, I actually even read a tweet from Dan Graza earlier, and he was talking about Joe Douglas being a guy who learned under Ozzie Newsome, and how back in Baltimore, it was a very big deal about, they were never really a team to really jump in on that first wave of free agency that you were talking about. Mm-hmm. And, even though, like you said, George Fant isn't necessarily a guy that jumps out at you right on the page right away, but I think Joe Douglas obviously knows what he's doing. He's there for a reason. And I think there's plenty of good value that is going to come in the second and third waves of free agency. So, yeah, got to put big trust.
Yeah. You got to put big trust in the big man. And EA, I don't know if you want to talk about this on the podcast, so I'm going to ask you, but I was kind of thinking maybe we could talk about guys that are still on the market that maybe intrigue you or that are intrigue Liv or myself, or just that are options for the Jets if they decide to go any position really. But since we talked about Fant, maybe we could talk about some potential O linemen that could get snagged up in these next couple days.
Yeah, there's so many players out there on the market. I'm kind of keeping my eye out to get off offensive line a little bit, and we can talk about that further, Greens and Liv. Let's dip into the receivers a little bit because Jamison Crowder's back. He's your nickel. He's your slot receiver. Robbie Anderson, unrestricted free agent. Demaryius Thomas, unrestricted free agent. Hopefully Quincy Enunwa comes back to full health. We'll have to see what happens there. But the Jets do have some questions on the outside, and one of the best remaining free agents on the market right now is Amari Cooper. So does Cooper have to go first before Robbie does? And what are the chances Robbie actually returns to the green and white?
Yeah, I'm going to let Liv answer that question first because honestly, I'm looking through some fan questions as we record here.
Yeah, and we certainly can talk while Liv gets to that too. Greens, we certainly talk about it as many offensive linemen as you both want to talk about. But I just thought it's interesting where we are right now in the process so early. Amari Cooper before Robbie, and then sorry, Liv.
No, it's okay. I think it's just such an interesting situation surrounding Amari Cooper because obviously earlier today we heard quarterback Dak Prescott got the franchise tag. So we know that the Cowboys are probably going to want to make a long-term deal with him. So it kind of makes you wonder, like, that is the same going to happen with Amari Cooper because teams are only allowed 2 franchise tags a year, correct? Or is it just one player is only allowed to be franchise tagged?
It's one player is allowed to be franchise tagged. So the Cowboys placed their exclusive franchise tag on Dak Prescott, which allowed Amari Cooper to hit the open market.
Yeah, so honestly, I don't know. I wish I had an answer to that, and I don't want to sit here and play the guessing game, but, when you hear from a lot of the Jets fans, a lot of people obviously around the Jets fan world are talking about wanting Robbie Anderson back, and wide receiver Robbie Anderson is, in my opinion, such a useful tool to Sam Darnold. And he even commented at the end of the year when we were interviewing him, he was talking about how he truly felt like him and Sam had finally gotten on a really good rhythm, especially in the second half of the season. So you would, like to think that Joe Douglas would notice that and take note of that and hopefully try and, make a return for Robbie Anderson. But again, he's a free agent. He's already made it very vocal that he's going to be testing the market. So we'll see. I don't know.
Yeah, I think EA, you brought up an interesting point that would Robbie wait for Amari Cooper to almost set the market at receiver? And even earlier today, with all these different reports of players agreeing to terms with different teams, if you look at the cornerback position, the Giants signed James Bradbury, or reportedly signed James Bradbury, and he is the second highest paid corner of this market to Byron Jones, former Dallas Cowboy, who's now taking his talents to the AFC East and the Miami Dolphins. So the Jets will be seeing him twice a year for the foreseeable future. And that's if you look at that, then it almost seems like, well, maybe Robbie Anderson wouldn't wait. But if it happened the other way for Byron Jones and James Bradbury, maybe I'd be singing a different tune. It just kind of feels like for the receivers, though, to your point, EA, it feels like it's the first domino is going to fall. And if that first domino, I assume, is going to be Amari Cooper, and then the rest will fall into place. I mean, if you read all the different reports about even the Jets' interest in Philip Dorsett, who's another speedy guy, but I mean, we'll see, obviously. And just by the way, on this whole, I'm peeping through the fan questions, there's a lot of shade. Like, it does not seem like Jets fans are too happy today, which I'm sure people are expecting. And when I say people, I mean the three of us definitely expected Jets fans to not be so happy with me tweeting for some fan questions. So I'm trying to find some good ones.
Okay, well, this is what a Jet fan wanted. Okay, guys, and I'm not throwing shade towards them either, but there are people who sometimes get very upset, and their thought process was by 6 o'clock Monday, the Jets should have had agreements in place with Joe Thuney, Graham Glasgow, and maybe Jack Conklin to boot. And then maybe they would have been happy at that point. But again, you're talking about a roster where Joe Douglas said we have a number of holes. We've been talking about Joe's approach since he came on board since June. How he was going to be meticulous, how he was going to set ranges on players, how he was not going to go over and ultimately hurt his franchise in the long term. Okay. And, hey, maybe the Jets did have interest in a guy like Toomey, but you can't do anything about the New England Patriots putting a franchise tag on him. I mean, bottom line is there's sometimes things are going to happen where teams are either going to re-sign a guy or they're going to put a tag on him. I don't think a lot of people actually anticipated that Toomey was going to be taken off the market. But you get a tackle right now in Fant, and we'll have to see what happens. Some folks out there are saying maybe the Jets are interested in a couple interior players, including Greg Van Roten.
Liv, do you want a fan question?
Yeah, sure. Hit me with it.
Well, you can either.
You want me to look at mine?
No. I was just going to say I was going to read you one, but there's a lot of ones like some fans are great though. Some are not so great. But how about this one? And this basically is, in terms of pass rushers, it's a blitz wants to know Jadeveon Clowney or Dante Fowler, who would you prefer? Like who would you like for the Jets?
If you're going to make me decide between those two edge rushers when it comes to the Jets, I personally am probably going to lean more towards Jadeveon Clowney, just because this is a guy who has the experience not only that you see on the field, but it's also shown up on paper with his stats. He's literally a 3-time Pro Bowler. He made it in 2016, 2017, and 2018. And the Jets, Joe Douglas said it himself, the Jets are in the market for an edge rusher. And I think that if you're really going to be serious about an edge rusher, you might as well go for a guy who is one of the top, if not the top, at his position in the league.
EA, what about you?
I go for me, Fowler, because system fit. I agree.
Not because he's a Florida boy.
No, take it easy. Take it easy. I agree with Liv. Overall, if you're talking about just the better player, when Jadeveon Clowney is going for 16 games, I know he's banged up a little bit last year. He's a dominant force, and Fowler last year really showed that potential he had flashed at times, I think, in Jacksonville, right, Greens? The guy had 11 and a half sacks last year.
Yeah, he had a career year last year or this past year, and his first full year with the Rams.
And we talked about the Leonard Williams trade before, and the way the Jets defense is constructed is I like them on the interior. The question is who's going to be bringing some heat off the edge. I think Fowler would be a perfect fit for this defense. Going to be interesting also to find out what happens with Jordan Jenkins. He's hit the market. A lot of people talking about the Crosstown Giants having an interest in another former Jet, Jordan Jenkins. But in terms of Fowler and Clowney, both those guys are big time talents, but I think Fowler would fill a bigger need for the Jets.
And, as we continue this podcast here, the Official Jets podcast presented by AWS, so this is going to be a nightly thing while the three of us are cooped up at home. And obviously we'll break down each day and free agency as it comes and goes, as it pertains to the Jets and around the league, just like we did today with DeAndre Hopkins and Byron Jones. But I just want to leave tonight's podcast, the first episode of I'm just going to call it the Work From Home podcast for now on the Official Jets podcast. Who's a free agent that's not an edge player, that's not a former or that didn't play for the Jets this past year that you'd like to see in green and white in 2020? And I'll leave it at that. And now I'm awaiting both your answers. So
wait, can you repeat that? I'm sorry, you kind of cut out on my end. Can you repeat it one more time?
Absolutely. So before we wrap up things here on the Official Jets podcast, the Work From Home edition, I want to know who's a player, a free agent that's still on the market. And when I say still on the market, I mean that hasn't been reported that they've signed with a team because nothing becomes official until Wednesday, that you'd like to see in a Jets uniform next season.
Okay, got you. Yeah, you want me to go or you want to go?
You can go, Liv.
Ooh, I actually need to think about it for a minute. Hold on. You go first. I need to think about it for a minute because that's a loaded question. There are a lot of free agents out there. There are a lot of needs.
Way you want. Well, yeah, you want me to go?
Yeah, I would like you to go because I'm thinking about it. You're asking me a question, and I'm thinking about it in terms of Joe Douglas. And I don't know if you want me to think in terms of Eric Allen. Are we playing fantasy ball here, or are we playing? That's
up to you.
This is how you. Hold on, Greens. This is how the Jets got to go about this in constructing their roster right now. So I'm kind of torn a little bit here because what were the holes of the Jets entering free agency? Offensive line, right? Edge, no doubt. Receiver and cornerback. So I think safe to assume the Jets aren't done at the offensive line position. Your question before, the fans' question, was a tremendous one. I think Fowler makes a lot of sense here for the Jets. What's going to happen at cornerback, though? Okay. You mentioned Bradbury and Jones being off the market. I would really like to see Brian Poole back here. Now, if Poole is not back here, who's your other nickel option? Because I think you're going to have to fill that in free agency. So I look at it in terms of positions. Fant is a guy, let's go back to Fant, is a guy nobody talked about heading into this process. Nobody. I think even us, we wrote free agency previews on NewYorkJets.com, and we didn't mention him. But here's a guy, an athletic guy who was a developmental player in Seattle, who his ceiling it has not been reached yet, and he could become your left tackle here. So it's a hard question for me to answer. But if you've seen fantasy ball, listen, I'd like to see Robbie Anderson back here. I don't know if the numbers are going to work. I'd like to see Robbie Anderson back here because I think that him and Sam Darnold have a good connection, and he, quote unquote, is on the market, even though he's played the past 4 seasons with the Jets. So those are a couple guys. I look at Fowler. I look at Robbie Anderson. Is it doable? We'll see.
What about you, Liv?
Yeah, I'm kind of just going to echo what EA said because as far as, when you think about the Jets' needs, obviously Joe Douglas has mentioned offensive line, which I think personally needs to be addressed first and foremost. And then you can kind of get into cornerback, wide receiver, all of those kind of things, and then edge rusher. But I mean, if you want my personal opinion, and I were to just be like, there's one guy who I really just want, who's a free agent right now that I really want to bring onto the team. It would be a big signing. I'm going to still stick with Jadeveon Clowney just because, again, we were talking about edge being a huge need for the Jets, and a lot of the big offensive linemen that we were in the mix that we were, hearing rumors here and there, they've already kind of been snatched up. So when I'm looking at the available free agents, and it's like the top cornerback free agent, Byron Jones was already snatched up. So it's like, why not now just go to a position where there's still a top elite player in the league available?
I think both of your answers are great. I think for me personally, I think for me, somebody I'd like to see in green and white is somebody that wore a different shade of green, and it also coincides with the same place that Joe Douglas came from. I'd like to see Jason Peters as a New York Jet, and for a couple of reasons. One, I know he's old, he's 38 years old, but if you're going by his stats, or which offensive linemen don't really have stats, but by everybody that seems to cover the Eagles and covered and followed the Eagles this year, seems that Jason Peters had a very good year at the age he had. And I think he would be a very good presence on this Jets offensive line that obviously has some holes. And if theoretically the Jets draft somebody at 11, what better person to learn from than Jason Peters? And on a selfish note, Jason Peters took a photo with one of my friends on his wedding day. They bumped into each other. I think that'd be a cool story. I'd like to tell him that story face to face. So for selfish,
so it's all about the
reasons. Yeah, for selfish reasons and for football reasons, I think Jason Peters would look good in Gotham green and white. So without further ado, that's a conclusion of episode 1 here on the Official Jets podcast, and it's not the conclusion. I'm holding on.
If Fant's playing left tackle, where's Jason Peters playing?
Well, if Jason Peters is coming, I don't think George Fant's playing left tackle. I'll put it that way.
Oh, so Fant's playing right tackle in your dream scenario?
Yeah, if Jason Peters signs with the Jets, I would put Fant at right tackle. And you brought up an interesting point, like what happens with Kelvin Beachum? Is he no longer a member of the green and white next year if Fant is viewed as the Jets' left tackle? I mean, obviously time will tell, but it's just some food for thought here as we wrap up the show. But to answer your question, yeah, if Jason Peters ends up on the Jets, I would put Fant on the right side.
Do you think we're going to have some Tom Brady news on Tuesday, St. Patrick's Day?
I hope so, because that would be some spicy podcast talk.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
I'm all for that. So again, tomorrow would be St. Patrick's Day. We'll be recording at night again, probably just to wrap up all the free agency drama that goes on the second day of the legal tampering period before it all becomes official at some point on Wednesday. And again, just to recap here, the Jets reportedly made a single move today in signing former Seahawks tackle George Fant, former Hoops player. And obviously, as the podcast continues on, we will continue on with more information. But, that's all we have here tonight on the Official Jets podcast powered by AWS. Liv, EA, have a good night's sleep, and we'll run it back tomorrow.
See you later, peoples.
Stay safe.